GDP, as many of you know, is an outdated form of measuring the government. It only establishes the spending of big markets and neglects individuals of a given country. We should be taking a look at non-market production, like household work, and see how that affects the economy. A recent study concluded that GDP would have been 26% larger had it taken such criteria into account. GDP only measures output and does not even reflect on said output, let alone human happiness and the well-being of the country it is representing. The output GDP measures consists of consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports, all of which overlook the average person in a given country and how they help to contribute to the economy. GDP does not take into account things that nature provides to our economy, nor does it take into account how the destruction of nature impacts our economy negatively. Natural disasters can sweep through a country, leaving its economy crippled, yet GDP does not reflect on this, nor does it reflect on things such as the wetlands that protect New Orleans from storms. It has been known for years that GDP is inadequate at measuring things that really matter in a country. These things include healthcare, education, housework, in-home child care, volunteer work. We all know that these things impact the economy, but unfortunately we also know GDP doesn't care about these things. As Robert F. Kennedy once said, GDP measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. Since many economists know that GDP leaves out many essential components, why can we not leave it behind? There are two reasons. One, we have a fairly accurate idea of what is being left out, and two, it's tough to come up with quantitative measures of things like well-being. It is also hard to drift away from something that has been used for so long. Simon Kuznets had the right idea when he invented GDP, but it's time for economic change. Economists such as Judith D. Schwartz and Robert Costanza both agree that GDP is not the best way to measure the wealth among nations. Schwartz makes the statement, could it be that the GDP, that golden standard of economic data, might not be the best way to gauge a nation's relative prosperity? Robert Costanza writes a phenomenal article on GDP and why it needs to be dethroned. He makes a compelling argument by describing why GDP is not effective anymore, why economists continue to use GDP as a measure of wealth, and listing what he believes to be better measures of calculating a nation's wealth. For a very long time, a misconception of GDP has been that if GDP is higher in a country, the people are happier. But the Easterlin paradox, invented by Richard Easterlin in the 1970s, is proving this to be false. The Easterlin paradox suggests that there is no link between a society's economic development and its average level of happiness. The Easterlin paradox measures subjective well-being and then provides an economic analysis of that data, which is done by conducting surveys. These surveys typically involve questions probing happiness or life satisfaction. A common argument to the Easterlin paradox is how people identify happiness and how that correlates with income and the economy. Some people do not rely on financial stability for happiness as much as someone else does, and this could make the measurements very hard to calculate. The paradox itself has limitations. This, therefore, is the counterargument. The economy affects every aspect of society financially, but it is often overlooked because of its complexity. However, if it is looked at from a simpler standpoint, one can see that the economy is a very important component to society and how its citizens live. It affects whether individuals get jobs, invest, or spend their money. Since the economy plays such a huge role in society, it is vital that the government is calculating it effectively. Economists are starting to see that changes need to be made in order to calculate things beyond market activity. Things such as health and education, the condition of public infrastructure, fuel efficiency, community and leisure need to be taken into account and analyzed because all of these aspects go hand in hand when calculating how much consumers are willing to spend and how happy they are with their day-to-day lives. It has been proven that just because the GDP is rising, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people in a certain economy are in good shape. More accurate measures of the economy, such as the Easterlin paradox, need to be further analyzed so that the citizens of said country can be represented fairly. Many economists are pushing for changes, and changes are constantly being made in effort to make better calculations about national wealth.